Okay, well here we are in the third gallery of Classic Black, the third showroom, if you will, and this room is meant to evoke the drawing room. What we today would think of as the living room, the main room in the house, where if you were a fashionable member of 18th century British society, this is where you would entertain your guests. And because it was such a public space, this more than any other room had to really reflect whatever contemporary taste was. And again, at this time period, as we've been talking all along, it's the neoclassical style. So to help give you an idea of what one of those rooms might look like, we have this fireplace set up with this garniture of objects, all in black basalt. Just to give you an idea, the types of objects that Wedgwood and his peers were making. We have these wonderful Grecian sphinxes, and then this quirky vase here, this tripod vase. Continuing in that vein, we have another wonderful object here, which one could say is quirky as well. Wedgwood collectors often refer to this as the fishtail ewer for obvious reasons, if you look at the shape of that handle there. This was based on a design that was made by a 17th century French artist named Jacques Stella. So remember, I was mentioning earlier that Wedgwood was freely borrowing from sources throughout history, the ancient world, the Renaissance, the 17th century, earlier in the 18th century, and so on. So this one in particular is coming from the 17th century. Wedgwood wrote a lot to his business partner, Thomas Bentley, about vases. He actually complained about making figures like the Hercules that we saw earlier, or the Triton, because they were hard. They didn't necessarily come out of the kiln successfully. He needed talented modelers to help put them together and so on. Vases were just a lot easier to make, and they were more flexible. You could switch out the type of handle you had or the type of lid that you put on an object, and suddenly it's a new object from what preceded it. So he makes a lot of different vases, and we have a great assortment of them here on this platform, again deriving from a lot of different sources, different designers from the 17th or 18th century, and so on. So feast your eyes on this wonderful assortment that we have here. In addition to vases, he made other ornamental wares as well, and we have a couple examples of those here. For instance, this is actually an oil lamp, theoretically, although whether it was ever used as such is debatable. It probably was mostly just for decoration, but it nevertheless has the place to put the wicks, and you could put oil in the bowl there. There's a lid that comes off, and use that to light your room. Or we have the candle holders in the back, and those may have been used for actual lighting a room. Two vases here with those pierced lids were meant to hold cut flowers to decorate and fragrance a room. And then finally, this funny little object, which looks like a hare's head, shaped like a hare's head, is actually a drinking cup. It's called a Righton, or a stirrup cup. And the idea was that if you were about to go off on a hunt, you're sitting on your steed, ready for the hunt to begin, and someone would pass you a stirrup cup filled with a bracing beverage like rum or bourbon. You'd swill that down, and then off you go to chase the poor fox or hare or stag or whatever. So it meant poor animals. So many of these stirrup cups are shaped like the animals associated with the hunt, like this hare's head that we see here. As we get to the conclusion of our tour, I want to call your attention to this window, if you will, that we've cut out in this wall, through which you can see this large graphic blow-up of Wedgwood Showroom that he did have in London. I mentioned that earlier, that he was the first potter to have a showroom in London. This is how it looked. And if you look carefully, you can see that all the objects are mixed together. He has basalt mixed with jasperware, mixed with cream-colored earthenware, all the different ceramic bodies that he made. He has ornamental wares like vases and sculptures mixed with what he called useful wares, teapots and dinner services and so on. And so to mimic that, in our last case, we mix some of those types of objects together, because although this exhibition, Classic Black, is all about celebrating the beauty of the black basalt body, I want people to remember that at the end of the day, Wedgwood had to sell these things, and so if his customer wanted a certain object not in basalt but in jasperware, or not in basalt but in cream-colored earthenware, or majolica or something else, he often made that available. And so we have some groupings in that last case just to drive that point home. So that brings us to the end of Classic Black, the basalt sculpture of Wedgwood and his contemporaries. We're so pleased to have this exhibition here. I hope you've enjoyed this tour, and thanks so much for your attention.